So I'm on with Steve Nallon. Thank you, Steve, for giving me your time today. Steve,
Pleasure.
thank you. You're probably best known for Spitting Image, like the original Spitting Image. But what I'd like to do is just find out about you growing up, how you got into voices, how you broke the industry, as the term is, yeah, and comedy as a whole, and things for the future. Let me shrink that down. How did it start for you, Steve? How did life start?
1960. So I'm 64 now. And it was a tough Yorkshire upbringing.
Okay.
Outside toilets,
Outside.
cobbled streets, tin baths, all that sort of romantic stuff, including consumption. I call it consumption.
I'm guessing
For
tin baths and outside toilets are not fun in the winter.
They're not fun in the winter. No. Um, it it was a difficult sort of emotionally because when I was 9, my mother came home and had a sudden a brain hemorrhage and died, and my
Mm.
father was diagnosed schizophrenic and had been in and out of mental uh, wards and so on. Although he did his best, I think, to cope with 2 teenage children for 4 or 5 years, it became impossible. And then we went to live with my grandparents on my mother's side,
Right,
um,
okay.
uh, who incidentally hadn't spoken since 1947. So it was a complex sort of family situation, though I don't think necessarily more complex than anybody else on my street, without
Right,
going
okay.
into the whole, it was like living on Coronation Street.
Well,
Uh,
you've said cobbled streets. That's the
It
start.
was well, it was a cobble street. I mean, they tarmacked it over, so it's not cobbled anymore. And frankly, the house I lived in, they pulled down,
Right.
uh, not fit for human habitation. Because anyway, that was horrible in winter. That was a shocker. But the comedy side, well, the performing side was always there from a very, very early age. So
Right.
I would dress up in a shawl that could be a turban, or it could be some sort of uh, shawl, whatever it was. And every time I changed the nature of the shawl or scarf, I became a different character in my
Right,
head.
okay.
Um, and um, and I never liked it when people saw me doing this because I just like being in my own little world.
Hmm.
Um, where that all comes from, who knows? I think emotionally, it probably came from the time I was in hospital with TB. And you either play with the other kids or you develop emotional independence and self-reliance, and I did the latter.
Right.
Um, so I've never been, on a personal level, I've never been a member of a tribe. I've never been a joiner. I've always been that bit of an outsider. But family wise, I felt wanted and loved, and there were many, many good people in my family, and very supportive. So
That's good.
when the Leeds Grand was great because on a Sunday night they would often do a concert of charity night. So I
Right.
saw people like Bob Monkhouse. I
Nice.
saw uh, uh, people like Tommy Cooper,
Oh, really?
and so I saw Victor Borger was a great one. Barry Humphries, I saw, who I later
Okay.
worked with. But the big one that had a massive effect on me was Ken Dodd. I just had never laughed so much
Really?
ever, really. I just thought I sort of realized how inventive he was, his characterization, and I studied him. He was very interesting. He said that he always began the show with very normal sort of, husband and wife jokes and all the rest of it. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
slowly, as the show went on, he would develop it into the more surreal and the more dangerous. And I love that idea of knowing that an audience couldn't cope with the surreal at the beginning of the act, but if you slowly introduce them to it, they could get to it in the second hour. And I loved the physicality of him. That he used to come in this canary side, this huge canary thing and the hats. And then, of course, he changed the direction slightly, and he would bring on Dickie Mint, the vent that he used to do. And I was also aware, watching programs like The Good Old Days, of characters such as Sandy Powell, who had also done a vent act. So I could see where he was drawing on that whole tradition. And to me, he was the ultimate comedian, because he was so rounded in his theatricality. I knew comedians on the clubs because I started doing the clubs when I was 16.
Yeah.
But none of them had that theatricality that Ken Dodd had. But I couldn't. I knew I couldn't emulate him in the sense that there was no way I could do what he did. So I had to, find sort of my own way of, and I never really impersonated him either. I had a go, but couldn't quite get it. But yeah, and I started reading. I also saw in an interview that he had read Freud.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
And in fact, that's what I did. I went to the library and I bought a copy of Jokes and Their Relationship to the Unconscious. And he famously said that the problem with Freud, I can't do the impression very well, but the problem with Freud is he never played second house on a Friday night at the Glasgow Empire. And it was true. Actually, the book is an interesting book because it's really about wit and the way the mind works with comedy. It's not really about jokes. It's a mistranslation of the German. But anyway, so I read that when I was about 16 or 17, based on the fact that Ken Dodd had read it. And when he died and his widow was on television talking about him, she talked about the mass of books he had on comedy.
Oh, really?
And comic theory, and he studied the comedy of others. To me, he probably knew more about the comedy than anybody else, with the possible exception of Bob Monkhouse, who I got to know a little bit. But Bob never had to my mind, he never had the whole theatrical package that Ken Dodd had.
Okay.
So, and then at university, I met some people who worked in theatre. Who's a guy I got to know, whose father was a director of a theatre Clwyd, and he said Ken Dodd wasn't funny. So I realised there was this whole group of people that didn't get it,
right.
And I sort of, maybe it was a working class thing. I don't know, but he just said that no. He said Ken Dodd isn't funny. I said, well, yes, he is, and frankly, someone's funny if somebody is prepared to laugh at them.
And yeah,
so,
I would. Yeah,
I don't have that thing of saying he's not funny or she's not funny. It's some people. A friend of mine doesn't find Morecambe and Wise funny, so I don't think they're funny. But he doesn't say they're not funny. He says he doesn't find them funny, and that's that's
the distinction, isn't it? Yeah,
that's the distinction, and it's funny. I say people, and I love those jokes. For example, there's one in Naked Gun where I think it's Leslie Nielsen and is it Victoria Presley? Anyway, they're leaving a cinema and they're going ha 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 ha, oh, that was so funny, and then there's a reveal and it was Platoon.
That's it.
Laugh at Platoon if you want to. I think that was a really sort of neat joke about the nature of comedy. Why shouldn't they laugh at Platoon if they wanted to?
I got to admit, I liked the Naked Gun trilogy. I haven't watched the new one. I did enjoy Airplane. I enjoyed Top Secret. As like an adolescent, that sort of slapstick silliness really appealed to me.
Well, slapstick's a great one, and it comes from clowns. And actually, they had a slick that when you hit it, it made that extra noise, so it didn't really hurt the person, but it sounded as if it hurt the person. And again, with anybody who came on the television and talked about comedy, I would just gravitate towards them. Buster Keaton was interesting because he was a great physical, great physical comedian. And like many comedians I came across, their parents had been comedians. Anyway, as a young lad, Buster Keaton had been a part of an act with his father,
Yeah.
and the part of the routine was to sort of put him on a wave through the audience when he's sort of carried through the audience. And his father noticed that when the young lad Buster was in pain, he showed it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, don't do that. Don't show pain. Because the audience won't laugh. If they sense there's actual pain there, they won't laugh. If they don't see the pain, they will laugh.
Right.
So that's how that whole dead face of Buster Keaton came about, because he'd come from that tradition where you don't show any pain. And very briefly, jumping ahead to Spitting Image, it was fascinating with Spitting Image how physically violent the puppets could be to each other for the very simple reason they didn't show pain.
Mm-hmm.
You could hit them on the head and the face wouldn't alter. And in fact, we went out of our way not to make it deadpan, to just be hit, and hit. Sometimes they did show pain, but on the whole, it was funnier if they didn't show pain. And I think all those sort of, not rules about comedy, but the theories of comedy and how jokes work. I started writing my own little jokes when I was about 14, 15. And I worked out for myself that that it was important when you're writing a joke to put the most important word at the end of the sentence. And years later, I discovered this. There's a technical term for this. It's called a periodic sentence. And basically, you put the most important word there. And the other thing you mustn't do in a build-up to a joke is use a key word that's in the punchline earlier in the joke. There are one or two exceptions to that, but they're very rare. Or there's a twist on that word at the very end. But on the whole, you don't use the word. So if you if you tell a joke and you accidentally use the words that's in the punchline, and I'm telling the joke, what I do is make the joke longer, and hopefully they've forgotten the word I used. Otherwise, it will not have the impact. And so all those sort of very technical things, people, I'll tell you who talks about this. A comedian called Adam Bloom talks about this. Jimmy Carr talks about this. And of course, Ken Dodd talked about it, because what Ken Dodd said, he said that, and I loved his analogy, he said that a joke was like a mechanism in a watch. If one cog was slightly out, it wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to be right.
Good way of looking at it.
And here's the strange thing. Often it takes ages to get the wording right. And it's the reason why I would recommend comedians to record what they do in their tryouts, because it's often on the tryout that you're in front of an audience, you've got the adrenaline running, and you come up with a perfect way of saying it. And then they come off. I've had comedians come off stage and say, what did I say? How did I say it? I can't remember. You should have recorded it. You should have recorded it, because you get it right. And sometimes it's a struggle to remember what you did. And I'm off. I don't record as I'm writing, but sometimes I come up with the right way of doing it, and then I forget very quickly and go, I've got scraps of paper all over the house with, I keep these all over the house. Look, they've all got the little sort of notes and stuff on them, and I could. That's something else, but there's just everywhere. There's notes where I've thought, if I'm writing something, I think, well, that's a better way of phrasing it. I just run straight to the notepad and write it down, because it goes, it disappears. And comedy is like that. It's the inspiration doesn't stay long, and you've got to. And the other thing is which is a really important point when you're writing, and Jimmy Carr talks about this, and that is to hone it down to the fewest number of words possible.
Hmm.
And if you've got an extra word that you don't need, it will automatically sound clumsy. And if you read his jokes or listen to him doing his jokes, they're incredibly precise. And but it sounds simple
Yeah.
that he just wrote the joke, but he said it takes a year to come up with his act. I think consists basically of 250 one-liners, but it takes him an entire year to write them, even though it's only an hour to say them. And that sense that it takes such a long time to come up with stuff. And again, another writer on a different type of writer that I listened to was John Cleese, who's also studied the theory of comedy and writing, creative writing theory, and he does a very good lecture on it. And he talks about, it's hard work when you're sat in a room all afternoon trying to hone down. You've got the germ of an idea, you've got the kernel of the idea of what the joke is. You're just trying to find the right word, the perfect word, and the right expression for that idea. And it takes a lot of time. And takes cuts and all that sort of stuff. So and that's continued in the writing I've done as well.
Okay. So
hone it down. Just keep honing and honing.
So I've got to ask. I would like again. Thank you for your time. I know I've just got a notification that we are running out of time. So.
No! How can we run out of time? We've only just started.
I know. These things are what they are, unfortunately. But it doesn't mean.
Why don't you stop it and then do another call?
Or I could just try and edit it together, which should be fine.
No, stop it and then do another.
Start another one.
No. Just try again. That.
So we're back on after a technical hiccup there.
I'm still drinking my tea. It's got
You're still drinking
slightly, and I've drunk most of it, but
that's fine. Just for the people watching, I know that I don't edit my videos, but we had a technical hiccup, so that's why this seems to jitter. So
the elastic band broke, so we had to start again.
Yeah, I think the hamster died that was running on it. So we were talking about your comedy heroes and how you found your way into comedy. Tell us more about Spitting Image. During my research, I found that you did the voice for Thatcher. Is that right?
Yeah, I did Thatcher, and there was an interesting story. So, so I wrote to John Lloyd, who had done not the 9 o'clock news, and he'd just done Blackadder. So he was about maybe 30 or so, but he was, the big BBC producer, and he'd gone over to Spitting Image. And anyway, so I found a way of writing to him, and he got hold of the letter. In fact, I think I wrote 5 letters to different addresses, but one of them got through. Right. He agreed to meet me in Birmingham at the Central Studios. Now, I lived in Birmingham at the time because I'd been at university in Birmingham. And later he told me that he agreed to meet me as a joke, because from his point of view, he got this letter from this 22-year-old lad who claimed to be able to do whatever Mrs. Thatcher. He genuinely thought it would be a great story to tell in the pub.
Right, okay.
But he also said to me, there was another side to me that came from my BBC training, which was always be open to every single idea that you are presented with. Never reject anything. I suspect the BBC don't follow that advice anymore, but that's another discussion.
A longer discussion.
A longer discussion. But he agreed to meet me. I turned up at the Central Studios at reception. There was a misunderstanding, and the lady at reception thought I was John Lloyd. And she said, "Oh, you've got a meeting with our designer." And I had this split-second moment when I thought, right, I can either say, no, I'm not John Lloyd, I'm here to meet John Lloyd, and that would have meant me auditioning in the reception area, or pretend to be John Lloyd and get inside the building. Because my attitude was, as soon as I was inside the building and in a room somewhere, they would find it more difficult to get rid of me. And that's what I did. And John turned up, really not expecting me to be there. Neither did the designer, incidentally. He was called Brian. We became quite friendly, actually. But anyway, so anyway, I did the audition, but the audition wasn't me reading a script. I said to John, ask me a question and I'll answer it as the Prime Minister. So we said, oh, all right, we'll do that. So he asked me a question, Mrs. Thatcher, what are you going to do about unemployment? Let me say this about unemployment. The government are doing their very, very best at the moment. But what we have to do is have real jobs with real people. And that is what my government is trying to achieve. And because I went just straight in, it
That
wasn't
is
funny.
brilliant. Sorry, that is brilliant.
But it wasn't funny or anything like that, but I just went straight into it like that. And he was slightly taken aback. And then my memory of it is that another person, they're all having a meeting, an early production meeting about Spitting Images while the designer was there. And Roger Law turned up. Now, Roger Law is this, big sort of 6'6", Old Testament prophet looking guy with a huge beard, and very intimidating. And he turned up and he wanted to know who I was and what I was doing. So John said, this guy can do Mrs. Thatcher. So Rogers basically said, well, do her. And I said, I do not take orders from men. And he burst out laughing, and we've been friends ever since. And I think it was that moment that just taking a bit of risk.
Mm-hmm.
He loved the idea that it was a bloke doing Mrs. Thatcher because he understood that whole tradition of satire, and the which pantomime and all that sort of stuff, travesty, the nature of travesty, and he loved that whole concept, and we talked, and I knew a little bit about commedia dell'arte and puppets and Punch and Judy and all that sort of stuff because I'd done that at university. So we had, things to talk about. And I'd also read a lot of Swift, so we were able to talk about satire, and so on. So I was very lucky that the stars were aligned that day, and that's how I joined Spitting Image.
Okay, so other than Mrs. Thatcher, who else's voices have you done?
Well, I did. Well, it's long ago now. People don't know who they are, but the one people will remember. I mean, I did people like Roy Hattersley. Now, Roy Hattersley was deputy leader of the Labour Party, and he was the one that used to speak like that. And on the popular Spitting Image, you would have him spitting, and he used to say, "I'm the eponymous hero of Spitting Image," and he was my MP as well, actually, because I lived in Birmingham. But the one that I didn't do this at first. So there were one or two things on Spitting Image. It took a while for them to introduce certain characters. And
Right.
there was a sense that you could do Prince Philip and the Queen and Prince Charles. Prince Charles had been done by Mike Yarwood previously. And Stanley Baxter had done a Queen-like character. She wasn't called the Queen, but Stanley Baxter had done essentially an impersonation of the Queen's Christmas message as part of his show. So those barriers had been broken. But the Queen Mother was seen as sacrosanct, and you didn't do her. Anyway, they made the puppet, and it was voiced by somebody, but it didn't make the impact. There was no comedic character was there. And the reason why there was no comedic character was there, nobody really knew much about the Queen Mother. So anyway, to cut long story short, I on the first day back of, I think it was the second or third series, John said to me, "What new voices have you got that we can introduce to the show?" and I said, "Well, I've been working on Beryl Reid." Now, Beryl Reid was in her, I think, probably late 70s, early 80s by then. And he looked at me really quite cross and said, "Steve, this is this is a contemporary satire show, and you're telling me you've worked on Beryl Reid. And I said, yes, but I think Beryl Reid would be a good voice for the Queen Mum, and we could do her as that sort of Marlene character that she did on the musical variety stage. And he just burst out laughing because he immediately saw the potential.
Yeah. Okay.
Because they're the same age. There was a very little age gap between the two of them. And they sort of not looked alike, but, you know, they were of that same generation. He ran. I remember him running to the writers to tell them to write some sketches with Beryl Reid as the Queen Mum. And that's how that happened. And there was another one I did, which was Robert Ronsey, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, he spoke very slowly, as all clerics tend to, because they give boring sermons. And I did that, and he said, Steve, you can't do that. We need to speed it up. So he gave me a wonderful note, did John? He said, take that voice, but do it as if he's 7 years old. So I took that voice, very slow voice, and made it much younger and much more innocent. And then he turned into this little boy who believed in Santa Claus. Didn't sound anything like Robert Ronsey, but frankly, it was funny. And everybody
I get you.
So that became more important. It wasn't an accurate impression that mattered on Spitting Image. We did have one or two people who came in onto the show. They came with very accurate, I won't say who they were, but they came with very accurate impersonations. Never worked because it wasn't about the impersonation. It was about matching the voice to the physicality of the puppet and creating a caricature that was funny.
Right.
And that was I discovered that wasn't easy. I didn't always get it right either. None of us did, actually, because there were some characters that just didn't work. You never saw them again. But that was so when it worked from my point of view, which it did with Ronsey, and I think it did with Hattersley because that was a massive exaggeration, and it didn't really sound like him, but it's you know enough like him to be recognisable, and the Queen Mum, and I used to watch. I never watched the show with a group of people, but I used to watch the voice artists watching me as I was doing the Queen Mum, and they always had a smile on their face. So there was that warmth that Beryl Reid had. There was the warmth that Beryl Reid had very naturally when she spoke. She had a very warm, grandmothery voice, and I, you know, but adding the Marlene character, and of course everybody on the show knew their comedy history, and they knew who Marlene was. You know, that's the other thing. I was working with people who knew the comic history, and they knew that tradition, whether it was satire or whether it was Ken Dodd. It didn't really matter. But so I suddenly found myself I suddenly found my tribe, if that makes sense.
Okay. Are there any voices you can do that haven't been on Spitting Image? And I don't mean the ones you've had, not for Overlord or Atomfall, because I did see you've done some video games as well.
Well, I do video games. Now I'm here's my confession, right? So here's my plug, because I've got my book here. So I've written this
Ghost Stories.
Which have been very well received. And I'm hoping, well, I've started doing audio versions of they're not available right now. If you look very closely, you can see we're recording this in August, but people will be able to be watching this in a future. So it may well be available in the future. And so many of the voices from the 70s I did of forgotten politicians have now ended up as characters in the book.
Keeping them alive, I guess.
Well, I think, yeah, most of them are dead. And in fact, I sent one of the recordings to a friend of mine from school days, who I worked with on plays at school and stuff. And he sent me a note back saying, I recognised Harold Wilson, Jim Callahan, and Harold and Shirley Williams. And I said, "Yep, yep. I'm guilty." I slightly adapted their voice, but yeah. So that's what happens to old voices.
They get
It's a bit like
regurgitated as ghosts.
Sorry.
They come back as ghosts.
They come back, yeah, literally come back. Well, actually, those characters weren't ghosts, but there are probably some characters in the ghost collection, because there are 12 very good stories to read, that will probably, I'll probably borrow voices. I don't
Which
really
age
do.
range is the book for?
Oh, adults. It's not for
It's not a kid's book.
No. If you want a children's book, I also have this book available.
Yeah, I did see that one as well.
So, but we're not here to talk about those. But it was fun to sort of do them in a different context, to bring them back. But I don't really do modern voices. I two reasons. One, I don't want to, and the other reason is I can't. And the reason I can't is because I think you just lose the ability. I don't know why. It happened to Mike Yarwood. He simply stopped being able to do contemporary voices. He did say to me that because we worked together on his Thames series, Mike said that he got to a stage where all the voices he was impersonating were older than him. And the reason for that is, if you're 25 and you're impersonating somebody who's 50, that's funny. If you're 50 trying to impersonate somebody who's 25, that's sad. And it just doesn't work. Because, mockery and satire is a young person's game. And the older you get, yes, I think on radio you can probably get away with it, but less so in person. And I'm 64 now, so the idea of me trying to do Anton Deck or somebody, or any of the people on television, why I don't want to. I'd rather write my stories and stuff.
So what did you think of the reboot of Spitting Image? Because I got to admit, there's a couple of pieces on YouTube that really did crease me up. I like Donald Trump attacking Keir Starmer. I like Greta Thunberg's weather report.
I thought I know the people involved, and actually it's Scott Brooker who's done the illustrations to the book, who's a guy working on Spitting Image. And I saw the stage show. I think a couple of times actually. So in Birmingham, and I saw it in London. I think the observation that I made was that I thought the sketches were a bit long. And one of the things that John Lloyd came in with a pencil he had a pencil. And I remember because I gave it to him at the very beginning of the series, and it was the same pencil. It was quite because I use a special type of pencil, which is a sort of, you can't really see it, but it's a 3D pencil. Anyway, so he was still using it at the end of the series, but now it was that size.
Right. Okay.
And what he'd done, he used it to cross everything out, to make the sketch, what I said earlier about honing it down. So a sketch would come in, and he would go through it, forensically cutting the words you didn't absolutely need.
Like we said earlier.
Yeah, and I don't think that was... And frankly, it's an issue I see on television. It's an issue I see in theatre all the time, where things just have too many words, and it'd be just so much better if you cut the words. And I'm guilty of that sometimes as well. But you've just got to find a way of filleting it, so you take out all the, I did a one-man show years ago of Homer's Odyssey, and I had to introduce the concept of Zeus. The original script went, Zeus was the most important god among the many gods that were present. And, well, you know what it turned into? Top god, Zeus. That's all I needed. Top god, Zeus. You didn't need anything else. You didn't need any verbs, because you fill in the verbs yourself with, but applying that throughout an entire script is I say, it's hard work.
I can imagine
it looks so simple. It's just like but no, and anyway, John was brilliant at cutting, and I would have. I think what I noticed with the reboot is the sketches were 2.5 minutes long, 3 minutes long. And John said that if a sketch went above 40 seconds, it had to earn its keep. So, it needed to be fast. And there was one or two episodes of Spitting Image where even if only 60% of them worked, it was enough, because even if a sketch didn't work, there was a sketch in 40 seconds that did.
Right, I got you.
That gave it a momentum. So I thought the ideas were great. I thought the voices were good. I thought the puppets were fantastic as ever. And there's nothing wrong with the sort of comic ideas and the jokes themselves. It was just, I was desperate for a pencil to get in there and just cut it all down. Anyway, that's mine.
No, and that just goes back to what we were saying earlier. So, again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I know you're busy. Just to wrap up, what is your plans for the future now? Is it just the books, like the children's and adult ghost stories, or is there anything else?
Well, I think the as you can see, it's quite a sort of a thick, it's quite a thick book. It took me ages to write. There's another one. There's a I've got another one somewhere. The second part of that. So it's somewhere here. I haven't planned this. So there's two of these. So there's a third one planned but not written yet. But I'm also now writing on horror and ghosts. So I'm writing at the moment for this magazine. So there I am, writing about haunted houses. Yep. So that's another aspect of what I get up to. Keep me out of mischief, as they say.
As they say. Well, thank you again for your time today. I do really appreciate it. Anyone and everyone who's watching this, go check out the books. I guess they're going to be worth a look, given your career. I would imagine they are.
Hope so.
And again, thank you again.
Cheers. Thanks. Look,
cheers.
And I've nearly finished my tea.
You nearly.